Okay, so welcome to Relocating 101, a homebuyer's guide to the basics of relocating to Minnesota. Kristin and I are so excited to have you here, and we'll jump right in. So yeah, feel free to be interactive, be as interactive as you would like to be. Camera on or off, throw questions in the chat. Like, feel free to have this be, questions and answers type of a situation. So I'm Tina. So nice to meet everybody. I'm a senior loan officer with Guild Mortgage. I've transplanted a little bit, born in California. I was raised in North Dakota. And then as soon as I graduated from college, I moved to Minnesota and have made it my home ever since. I've been obsessed with Minnesota for my entire life, and I'm so grateful to be here. I've lived and worked within the metro for the last 13 years, working in home loans. I love helping first-time home buyers, and I'm also a certified credit smart facilitator, meaning that I am very passionate about helping folks who are working through credit transitions and trying to kind of build back up their credit score. And then 95% of my business comes from referrals and word of mouth. So I'm always very grateful and also very cognizant of that anytime I'm working with folks.
And I'm Kristin. Just piggybacking off of Tina, I'm a realtor with Coldwell Banker, and I was actually born in Minnesota, little super small town in northern Minnesota, kind of near like the Brainerd Lakes area. And then during high school, I was in the St. Cloud area. And then for a short period, like 3 years in Wisconsin, hated it. And then back to Minnesota and have been living kind of on the west side here ever since 2018. I primarily work with first-time home buyers and transplants as of recently, getting a lot of people kind of migrating to the Minnesota area, especially from southern states. So that's been really fun to work with recently. I'm a board member for the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance. And I base my business off building relationships first. So just having that rapport and that trust, and um, usually a fun kind of banterish relationship. Tina gets in there too. But yeah, I think it's just important to have that relationship first, and then just build everything else from there. I like to travel, hike, camp, all the outdoors things. We like to travel to different like national parks primarily, or like outside of the country, Scotland, Europe, always fun. And then I also love referrals, just like my Tina here. The highest compliment you could give me is referring me to your friends and family.
So fun. So we figured we start a little bit talking about Minnesota. We've worked with quite a few transplants. We've jumped on Zooms, and just kind of like the geography of the state is hard for a lot of people to kind of understand. And so when we talk about the metro, we talk about kind of this like primarily blue zone right here. So that's Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then we'll have like first ring suburbs and second ring suburbs. So St. Paul is the state capital. So we have a lot of resources within St. Paul as far as like community services, outreach, things like that. And then between like these two cities, I always joke with people that like Minneapolis is like the hip, cool younger sister, like it's very flashy and chic. And then St. Paul is like the cozy knitting like older sister, like very like
Mhm.
relaxed, and kind of like more of a laid back vibe. Both cities are really fun and beautiful in their own regards. And then the further that you get out to just getting like a little more distance, a little more space, things like that. Um, then down here we have like Rochester, so that's Mayo Clinic, so very highly populated healthcare area. St. Cloud up here we have a college. If you want to talk about like the borders of North Dakota, we can talk about that. And then another big area is this Duluth, this blue span. So if you're looking online for jobs and things, you might find things in like Rochester, which is 2 hours away from the metro, Or you might find things in Duluth, which is another 2 hours away from the metro. So, like, we don't want to be living in St. Paul and finding work in Rochester or vice versa. And then Duluth is like a hidden gem of Minnesota. And also, just an FYI, in case geography is not your strong suit, this little line is Canada. So, like, we do go all the way up to Canada. Um, and right here, we kind of have what's known as Lake Superior. And my favorite is Lake Superior is actually an ocean cosplaying as a lake. So, like, up in Duluth, we have the most wild, crazy weather patterns. So if you're not a big fan of like physically not being able to leave your house for 3 days when we have a snowstorm, Duluth is not your jam. Um, Duluth is like very outdoorsy, very, very hip, very crunchy granola, but also like you got to be rough and tough to be able to like hang up in Duluth when the weather hits.
Mhm.
Kristen, any feedback on this slide?
Um, no, not really. You did a good
Okay.
job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I will also note from like a queer safety perspective, Duluth has a pretty solid
Mhm.
population and community. St. Cloud is really working on it. I don't think that it's like St. Cloud and Rochester like try really hard, but are it's everything within like the metro itself is very inclusive. And then when we get into the metro, I wanted a little bit of a close up to talk about like the different suburbs. So you can see St. Paul and Minneapolis are honestly like right next to each other. And then we have this like big river that comes between them. The airport is right down here. So like this is a really popular area that people kind of tend to. And then you can kind of see we have like first ring right here and then kind of get to a second ring out here and then go onwards from there. So if you're looking for like a little bit more space, a little bit more land, we're going to want to kind of go like further out even from like this red zone. And I'm going to let Kristen give any of her commentary with being the realtor of the group. What do you see?
Um, Yeah, I agree. First ring and second ring suburbs are all like really close to Minneapolis, St. Paul. I know a lot of other states, the suburbs can be like up to an hour away from downtown. But even the second ring suburbs are at most like 25-30 minute drive from Minneapolis, maybe 45 depending on what side you're
Hmm.
on. Like if you're going from west side suburbs of Minneapolis to St. Paul, it's probably like 45 minutes. I
Also,
always
like,
tell oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry, no, you go.
I always tell all my clients, work is kind of an easy thing to do around here just because you don't really have to worry about like rush hour as much either as in other states. I know in other places during rush hour, you're maybe adding like an extra hour onto commute. But here I would say at most an extra half an hour, like if it's snowing. But otherwise, yeah, you kind of have like the whole metro like really close and tightly packed, which makes it really convenient.
Hmm. Yeah, and then I'll piggyback off of commuting. So, like, if you can pop on one of these like outer ring highways, it's going to be a lot faster than actually trying to get like through the cities. So like I live up in Roseville, I live in a first ring suburb. And so if you told me that at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you wanted me to go through Minneapolis and go to South Minneapolis, I'd be like, over my dead body. Am I driving that? But if you were like, oh, at 4 o'clock, I need you to pop over into Woodbury, I'd be like, oh yeah, sure. I can just like pop on 694 and like get over that way. Kristen has a lot of cats.
Yeah,
So
I do. I have four of them. Not really by choice, but they broke in. So,
so just like something to think about when you and it's something that we'll talk about more in regards to like where you want to live versus where you're working. Because like we don't really want to be like living in Hopkins if you're working in Woodbury. Like that might be a little bit more exciting, but also like how much do you commute? I never want to commute more than 10 minutes, where other people are like, oh, an hour and a half each way is totally fine. So just things to think about. when I reached out to some other transplants and I was like, what's the like number one thing that people need to know about? The basic thing is the weather swings. So we have like very broad, like you get all 4 seasons. Like you don't have to worry about missing out on anything. And because we'll hit, so like average temperatures in June and July, like average is 80. We often have like 1 or 2 weeks a year where we are consistent like 100, 103, and it feels like soup outside. And then also when we talk about the lows, like we have like a couple of weeks where like it's low, low, and you're like, I don't really need to leave my house this week. And same with precipitation, like it never feels like we have like a ton of rain, but it normally comes in like bands and things like that. And every year is a little bit different, as we grow with climate change, every year is very different. Is it a year where it's like really cold, or is it a year with heavy snow, or vice versa? So just remembering like you're gonna want layers. Layers are a good thing, especially in like the spring and fall. You can wake up in the morning and it's, 30 degrees outside, and then by the afternoon it's 60 degrees outside, and you're like, those are two, like, how am I supposed to dress for that? Two very different things. Um, I had someone move in like March or April, and then we got like 5 feet of snow. They lived more up north, so again, more like wild weather patterns. But they were like, yeah, I wish I would have bought a shovel before we got like a massive snowstorm. So just remembering that we get the high high still, but with the low lows. Kristen, you live with a transplant. Any feedback from Liz?
Yeah, I surprisingly not going too far, like that Duluth area, 2 hours, or even kind of where I grew up, which is more like central Minnesota, still only like 2 or 3 hours. The weather does change a lot, um, but mostly just in terms of snow. I would say the metro, we actually don't get a ton of snow, or at least haven't the last few years. Um, but if you're wanting more snow, that kind of upper northern area does see a lot more than we do.
No.
And then as far as seasons go, I do think that spring and fall could be longer here. I feel like, especially our spring, kind of goes from like 0 to 100. Like one day it's winter, the next day it's summer.
I don't know.
um,
See, I don't think that's fair. I think we just get like
really,
the weird dots because we have like 4 fake springs, and then there's like a couple of
that's
mud
true.
seasons dipped in there, and
Hmm.
then you get like fake summer and then more winter.
Right. But again, like we don't really get like a nice spring. We get like 30 degrees and then 70 and then 30
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden it's like summer. I mean, we maybe have like a solid 2 or 3 weeks, I
that's
would
fair.
say, of spring, but same with fall. I wish it was longer.
I
I
do wish
love
fall was
fall.
longer.
So,
Yeah, that would be nice. Um, oh no, we'll talk about it on the next slide. Also, I just threw up these stats because I was like so impressed. Like Minnesota is the least stressed state. um, according to like a ton of other states. In 2023, we were like the first in voter participation, quality of life, third best state to raise a family. That was in 2024. Third in volunteering, most bike-friendly city in the country, Minneapolis. I thought that was super cool. I really loved that.
mhm.
Third in child well-being, life expectancy, fourth best state for women, fourth best state for doctors, fifth in healthy people, and fifth in the six qualities of life. So like Minnesota has a passion for being outdoors, living life to the fullest, like trying to have that work-life balance, all of those types of things. So when we talk about also like full spectrum holistic living, um, it like I feel very happy to be here.
These are fun.
I know, right?
Another fun fact that I learned the other day that I thought was interesting. Oh, I think maybe you have it on the next slide,
Oh, do I?
or maybe you're coming up on it. We have more coastline than California does, just with our lakes.
Yeah, no, that's not on my slide, but I should have
Oh,
added
well,
it.
there you go.
Yeah. So this is part of Lake Superior, and literally it is an ocean that pretends to be a lake. So we have six national parks and then 75 state and recreational parks. It's like absolutely phenomenal. I should have added that to my slide. My family has a map of all of the state and national parks, and every time we visit one, we put like a little star on
Oh, I
there.
love that.
Yeah,
Cute.
it's super fun. Like there's just so much green space, and there's green space
Hmm.
everywhere in the
Hmm.
cities, in the suburbs, at our state parks. 4,000 miles of paved bike trails, golf courses, live theaters are everywhere. 23 craft breweries. We have breweries, cideries, distilleries. We also have like non-alcoholic bottle shops. Non-alcoholic and THC are really starting to take over, like THC beverages, which I absolutely love. So people are like really getting into more of those like non-alcoholic spaces too, which have been
Hmm.
really, really wonderful. So it's a great blend. You can see Sociable is in Minneapolis, and everyone just bikes there. Like we bike there from Roseville. It's so fun. And so that's Minnesota. Any questions about Minnesota specifically? Anything that we didn't cover about how amazing the state is and that we're obsessed with it? Okay, cool. So the next couple of slides will talk about like the market a little bit. I feel like Minnesota has had a housing shortage for at least the last 15 years. So home values have just like pretty steadily increased since the like 2008, 2009 crisis. And as we have more people move into the metro, we're seeing that houses are just going to like continue to be more expensive. So this is data from the last 30 days in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and these are average prices. Okay. So something that I don't think gets talked about enough in Minnesota is that even within one city, we have like massive swings for values.
Hmm.
So it's not to say that like, oh, Minneapolis is the expensive city. Like, no, you can definitely find houses in the like two to $250,000 price range in addition to the like $10 million price range. Like it's obscene. And same with St. Paul. So we have some of these like really older character homes that are millions of dollars, depending on which neighborhood you're in. And then we also have, really beautiful homes that are two to $300,000, much more like reasonably priced, or for like an average human. Okay, so we'll jump into the home buying process. So team, you'll have your loan officer and then any like assistance on my team. So we'll help you with transitioning as far as like your budget, talking about kind of like your employment information and what we're going to need with those moves. And then making sure that we're getting you pre-approved for the right purchase price based off of that monthly payment and what we're anticipating for your new employment so that we kind of have a gauge as far as like what we would be looking at. One thing that a lot of people have a harder time with other states, especially with states that have like a lower cost of living, is that Minnesota does have a slightly higher cost of living, but we normally have our wages that increase with that. So folks are often very surprised at just like how much higher their income is when they move to our state versus other states. I'll have Kristen go over the agents.
Hmm. So Tina's on the back end, making sure that your finances are in order and you can afford the house that you're buying and you can get to closing. And I'm kind of on the front end doing all the fun things, like taking you to the houses and shopping for what you want to get to closing. And that's kind of, I would say, the biggest piece of it is, taking you around and looking at different neighborhoods and looking at different houses. And I'm by no means an inspector, but I can help a lot when it comes to what to look out for, just kind of like red flags in a house, um kind of those things that maybe you don't think about, like garage space or your electric panel and like how much electric do you need, kind of just small things like that that you might not totally think about all the time. And then I cover after that all of the contract management and negotiating and kind of making sure that process gets to start to finish, as well as Tina. She kind of works on the financing, and I kind of just work on, making sure that tasks are getting done, and me and the listing agent are communicating. We're setting you up for title, and we're just getting us across the finish line.
Perfect. And so then the process. So first and foremost, figuring out who you want to work with as your lender and your realtor. Now is really the time to do any of those like interviews, kind of ask those introductory questions, see who you want to work with, right? Especially with relocating out of state, like you're putting a lot of trust into these folks. So making sure
Mhm.
that like you're definitely comfortable with working with them. Once we're in place with lender and realtor, then we'll get you pre-approved. So we'll be running your credit, looking at all of that paperwork and kind of gauging as far as like what we're anticipating when we move into the Minnesota market. The timing gets a little interesting here because we'll do all of the introductory work on the application and have those conversations and have everything in play. And then once you have that accepted offer to your new role and we know that salary, that's when we're going to start making offers on houses. Okay. So it's kind of like a two-step system where we want to have the application in place. We want to kind of know what we're looking at and in the interview process, and then we'll start like really finalizing the house hunting. Okay. Because we want to know, we want to make sure that we don't want to make an offer on something and have your offer be accepted if we don't have that job lined up. So then once you go through the house hunting process with Kristin, tour several homes, Kristin and I are also like helping you nail down like what type of area you think you want to live in. We have some clients where they're like, oh no, we really think we want to be in this pocket. And we'll be like, I don't know. You just kind of like really feel like you're going to be this vibe. And guess what? They listened to me and I was right. So I'll never let them live that down. And
Yeah.
then that's when the negotiations come in and making sure that like everyone's wants and needs are met between you and the sellers. Kristin, any feedback on this slide?
Yeah, I guess just to touch a little bit more on like the timeline and process of things, that kind of in between of house hunting and getting locked down with your job can be a little bit hard. Oh, so sorry. And my cats are going crazy. Um, but yeah, it can just be it, and it really depends on kind of what you're looking for. Is it more important for you to find and nail down a job and then be closer to um work if you have to commute, if you have to go into work, or is it more important for you to kind of nail down where you want to be, and then kind of look for a job that is closer to where you live. So it's really preference there, but that can be the tricky part of kind of nailing down where we want to look for homes.
Got it. Okay. And then once you're under contract, that's when we'll do the inspection. I'll have Kristin touch on that.
Yeah, so once we're under contract, very quickly we turn around and order the inspection. Depending on the market, we usually have anywhere between 24 hours and 7 days to do this. This is part of the contract, so the contingency period on doing that inspection is part of the contract. So again, depending on the market, we kind of gauge like, do we need to get this done really quickly, to help get our offer accepted? It just looks better for sellers to not sit so long on that inspection period, just because, if you have to make negotiations or if you have to completely back out, the sooner the better, so they don't have to keep it off the market for too long. And yeah, that can be shopped for. So you can really choose whatever inspector or company that you want. I have some really good partners that I love to work with. So we do have recommendations. And then as your realtor, I always come to inspection. I know some realtors don't always come, but I always like to be there through the process too.
And just kind of like a ballpark on average, how much are those costing these days?
Depending on the size of your home, but the average being like 2,000 square feet, 2 to 3,000, it'll be right around 450 for the base level. And then you'll have add-ons like if you want to check for radon, which is a bigger concern here. A lot of homes do test outside of the safety range. And then also like sewer scoping and mold testing. There's a whole different array of things that you can get done that are just add-on costs.
I suppose we should probably touch on radon because radon is a naturally occurring gas that we have in Minnesota, and it comes up from the ground. And so, with all of our basements, I mean, the majority of homes have basements in Minnesota. So, with all of our basements, we like to test for radon to see, like, if you're going to be spending a lot of time in the basement, do we do something that's called a mitigation system that pumps the radon out of the house? So that it's safer to be in the basement. Um, yeah, and then
And
we, oh, sorry.
mitigation systems are pretty easy to install too. This is something that I usually negotiate into the contract after inspections through. And I would say, again, depending on the size of the house, you can usually get a mitigation system installed for around $2,000.
And sometimes we can include that as part of your negotiations.
Right.
And then we had a really great question. What are the usual deal killers from inspections? I'm used to foundation issues being a problem. Is
Mhm.
that common there? Yes. So I would say what I've seen as deal killers from inspections would be if we have concerns with the foundation, those are big ones. Water intrusion, if we have any questions as far as like if there's been leaks on the exterior, like leaks on the interior. Um, what else?
I
Mold,
see, yeah, mold or electrical issues a
electrical,
lot.
thank you.
Yeah, a lot of our homes are older and just not totally up to code anymore when it comes to like wiring. So that's a big one that is a big cost. Um, Another one that we kind of know before going into inspection, but can make or break is roof.
Mhm. Roof is the big one. We have a lot of wind and hail damage in Minnesota. So we're actually the number 4 state for most amount of insurance claims nationwide because of wind and hail damage. And so roof is a big problem right now. We're having with like insurance companies. So again, like really doing your due diligence with having that strong team. Um, but yeah, going back to like age of homes, so it's very common to find houses from like 1863 or like 1906. People, I've had people like throw 200 year and or 200-year-old birthday parties for their houses before. It's like so funny. So like if you get into some of these older houses in St. Paul and Minneapolis, especially, people are like, we don't open up the walls. We don't like we buy the house, we paint and we do some cosmetic stuff, but like unless you have tens of thousands of dollars liquid on hand to fix any problems that we find, we don't open up walls because you just never know.
Mhm. And I
So,
would say those are the houses that you see more of that like foundational issues in. A lot of our soil is really soft,
mhm.
especially like in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So you will pretty often see like sloping in the floors. And this is really hard because you don't always know whether this is a problem or not, especially with the um, big flux in temperature. So we go from negative 20 sometimes to 100, like Tina was saying. This can also quicken the time that your house takes to settle. Um, so is it settled already? Is it continuing to settle? That's kind of the question. And that's, um, you know, when we decide like, is it worth the risk or is it not? And you can kind of get a better idea depending on if you can like see the foundation. If it's like a built out finished basement, that's a lot harder to tell too. Yeah.
I also, a lot of the houses in St. Paul especially have what we call like limestone basements. So I just have to
Mhm.
show you a photo. So like it's like literally just limestones like built on top of each other. So a lot of that like settling just comes into play in regards to that. So it's very
Mhm.
common to see that. Yeah. And so that's where hiring an inspector is a very good idea to make sure like, is this a problem? Is this not a problem? Great question. So once we're through inspection, I come back into play. The fun part is over. Now we have to get to like the nitty-gritty of it. And the loan processing begins. So we're gonna probably update our paperwork, discuss about locking in the interest rates. We don't lock in until we have that accepted purchase agreement. And we're going to start the title process. Only you and your lender want to have any legal rights to your property. And so the title company's job is to make sure that everyone from the prior seller and older have been removed. And so you get to choose your own title company. Normally, I recommend working with whoever your lender or your realtor enjoys working with, just because then we'll have that intimate relationship with them. Most title companies are within like $100 or $200 of each other within the metro. So like that's really great there. And then they're going to be the ones facilitating the actual closing process. So when we get to the closing day, we meet with them to sign all of your 100 pieces of paper. And then I also try very hard to make sure that I'm at the closing so that if there are any questions, I'm available, but also just so that we can like party and have a really fun time at closing. I like to be there for that.
Mhm. Same here. I'm always at closing.
Yes. And then also with the processing is the appraisal process. So the inspection is 100% optional, but highly recommended. The appraisal is most likely going to be required. So what the appraisal does is make sure that we're not overpaid for the house. We look at those recent comparable sales in your area to make sure that like any other average seller would come in and spend the same amount based off those sales. And then as far as the lending aspect, we want to make sure that that collateral is safe. So we're looking for like extreme hazardous issues. So that's the like foundational issues, roof, open electrical, standing water, mold, things like that. Those are going to be flagged through the appraisal process. The appraisal on average is about $600, and that's included as part of your closing costs. Underwriting. So once we get all of your paperwork, title, and appraisal, we go through our underwriting process to make sure that all those I's are dotted, T's are crossed, we're good for the loan. And then once we get our final approval, normally the day before or the day of closing, you'll do a final walkthrough with Kristin.
Yeah, that's just making sure that everything's looking good with the house. If people are moving out, that they're all moved out and all of their stuff is gone, and just that nothing has went awry in between putting in our offer and seeing the house in person to closing. Someone didn't like put a hole in the wall, or the house didn't have a small fire or something like that, just so we don't get to closing and all of a sudden you're signed and then stuck with a big disaster or a big financial burden that we um, didn't already know about.
Yes. And then funds due at closing. So we'll let you know ahead of time, but that'll talk about your down payment, your closing costs, anything like that. So you'll bring that to the title company on day of closing. And then you'll sign your about 100 pieces of paper committing to your 30-year mortgage. And then you'll get your keys and get to move in. And sometimes, depending upon where you are, we can also like move closing around. So we have
Mhm.
had clients where they lived in one of the Carolinas and they were moving up to Minnesota, but we closed on their house before they officially moved to the state. So we sent all of their paperwork down to the Carolinas so that they could sign down there. And
Mhm.
then they actually got their keys after they commuted up to Minnesota. So like there's a lot of like really fun things that we can work around to make sure that like we're making sense for your timeline and what works for you.
Yeah. And just to kind of help on, especially if you are relocating, to help on that like back and forth. You don't want to come maybe to Minnesota like 3 or 4 different times just to kind of do these processes. Um, I am always there to walk through during inspection and we can video chat. You also get a big giant report at the end of it that's super detailed, has photos. And then as far as walking through too, if you are in that position where you're not going to be here until after closing, we can also do something similar there where we walk through and I video call you.
Okay, and so what goes into the pre-approval? So we definitely want to take a peek at your credit score because that'll affect the interest rate and how much we can take out a loan for. Your employment history. So if we are like an hourly employee going to another hourly job, that's awesome. If it's in the same field, that's super cool. If we're like hourly going to salaried, that's great too. It gets a little bit more interesting if we're like self-employed or if we're like commission work. That's where we'll have to have like a one-on-one conversation with that. And then we also look with your credit score, with your credit report, we look at your assets and your debts. So is it that we're selling a house in your current state and then we're putting that money into the new house and kind of timing those logistics? Is it we don't have a lot of cash on hand and we do want to look at one of the down payment assistance programs that we have in Minnesota? Even if you're not living here currently, we can use those assistance programs if the home will be in Minnesota, it will be your primary residence, all of that. So that's really excellent. And also, like, does it make sense to pay off debt while you're still looking at transitioning? Does it not make sense to pay off debt? All of those fun logistics that we go through. How much money? What does everything cost? So, earnest money, that's your promise to the sellers that you're going to buy their house. So, when your offer is accepted, part of your negotiations is deciding how much your earnest money is. And Kristin, remind me, is it still typically about that 1 to 2% of the purchase price?
Correct.
Okay. So then once your offer is accepted, that money is withdrawn from your bank account. And as long as we make it all the way to closing, then that money is credited back towards you. So it's literally just like a little deposit promise to the sellers that you're going to buy their house. There are a couple of points during the contract that you can write in where if you decide to not purchase their house, you get to keep your earnest money. So
Mhm.
the inspection is 1 point. So that's why it's very helpful to have the inspection. And then the financing is another point. So like if we deny you for the loan, that's 1 point where you can walk away from the transaction and keep your money. Any additional comments for earnest money?
No, again, I
Okay.
think depending on the market, that kind of tells you like how much you should or should think about at least putting down for earnest money. It just looks better to the seller. It makes them more confident in you if you can put closer to that 2 or 3%.
Mhm. Then the inspection is paid out of pocket if you choose to have one done. And then your down payment is the portion of the house that you own versus what the bank owns. So on average for first-time home buyers, we see that like standard 3%. If we use some down payment assistance programs, we could be looking at like we would still be having 3% of the down payment, but we would be using the assistance. So then out of pocket, we do have like zero down programs or like $1,000 out of pocket, depending on what you might qualify for. And then closing costs and escrows. Escrows is just like a fancy name for property taxes and homeowners insurance. It's like your little savings account for those two payments. And then closing costs on average are about 2 to 3% of your purchase price. For any property that you're interested in buying, I always like to run like a full cost analysis for like the monthly payment and the closing costs and escrow so you know a really good estimate of what you would have to pay out of pocket. And then choosing a home. Kristen, I'm going to let you run with this slide.
Okay, fun. I actually haven't looked too hard at this slide before this, so bear with me. Yeah, it looks like we're talking about what kind of home do you want?
Hmm.
And this is like one of the first things that I go over. Are you wanting single family, which means it's a separate building, no shared walls, a condo or a townhome, even a twin home. These are all kind of different types that we would want to talk through and kind of see what fits you best. Considering your commute, we talked about that a little bit already. Do we need to get to work? And do we need to do that by car? Are we going to want to be doing that by transit? Do we want to bike? Do we want to walk? Um, all things to consider. Old house versus new houses. Um, these are going to vary really drastically. An
Hmm.
older house is going to have more character, but it might need a little bit more love and care. You might want to have a little bit more of a cushion there just to prepare for things that could go wrong, and most likely will. Um, but same for like newer construction. I know they say like they don't build them the same way that they used to, and this is kind of true. I wouldn't say you would have like more problems with bigger issues, but you might have smaller problems with um, maybe just kind of like cutting corners a little bit. So yeah, always something to consider. Community, if that's really important to you, what are you looking to see within your community? Are you kind of, oops, hold on one second. Sorry, I was getting a phone call. Can you still see me
Yes.
and hear me? Okay, perfect. Community. So are you kind of like a quiet person and do you want like a big yard that is not very close to neighbors and you just kind of like to chill and don't like to be around a lot of people? Or do you really like a close knit community where you can just walk over to the coffee shop and you're a regular there and everyone knows you? Walk score again, going back to your commute. Do you like to walk to the stores? Do you like to bike to get groceries? Um, and then your must nots. That's something that a lot of people don't totally think about or consider as much as their must haves. But I think they're equally as important. So, yeah, if you hate that road noise and you want more of a quieter neighborhood, if you really need that garage because you're not used to the snow and you don't want to shovel out your car, or wait for your car to heat up in the morning before work, all really important things to think about.
All very important things to think about. That garage is, yeah.
Mhm.
And then different ways to prepare as a buyer in our market. So, really having your finances nailed down and talking about like what is your max payment, what is your comfort payment, your ideal payment. We want to make sure in our current market right now, like summer is very big in Minnesota. We're very seasonal creatures here.
Mhm.
A lot of people do hibernate in the winter. We're very, very, very active in the summer. I have some transplants that are like, I have never been this busy before in the summer in my life. Like, I don't understand how we run 24/7 in the summer. So same thing with our housing market. So a lot of people are very active in the summer. So if we have to go like over list price, if we have to offer more, like what does that mean for you? Getting your pre-approval in place. We want this paperwork done. Again, things move fast and fierce right now. So we don't really want to like be waiting on me and my paperwork when everything is could feel like a tornado in my world. So we want to have that paperwork in place so that we don't lose out on any properties. Be ready to be competitive. Like, what are our non-negotiables? So when we can walk into a house and be like, well, this is where this payment is. This is why I think it's really helpful to have those numbers on hand because you can be walking through and saying, well, this house is not worth this payment to me. Or this house is worth this stretch payment to me because like it hits all of our boxes, right? So like how far are you ready to go to beat out someone else to have this be your house? And then having an experienced agent is key. Having someone who is like really phenomenal at those negotiations, knowing those pluses and those minuses to like help you win an offer. Any other feedback there, Kristen?
Yeah, I think just having an agent that knows the market and knows what we're dealing with and can kind of have a guess as to how many offers we're competing against is really important because there is a lot of different things that we can put into play on a purchase agreement to make the sellers more confident in you versus somebody else.
Awesome. Okay, and then just some like common facts. So, how long is your pre-approval letter good for? So your credit pull is valid for 4 months. So that's how long it's good for. If we don't find anything within that 4 month time frame, we can just renew everything. Um, why do you need a buyer's agent? So in Minnesota, you don't pay for your agent's commission. The sellers typically do on average. Like that's still a point of negotiation, but that's what the standard is in our market. So on average, you'll pay what's known as like a broker admin fee, which could range anywhere from like $500 to $900, very standard. So it's really in your best interest to have that representation, to have someone help you negotiate and write that contract. Sometimes I think we forget that the purchase agreement is a legally binding contract. So you definitely want to make sure that you're covered and all of your needs and wants are being met. And then how long does the process take? I mean, it can take anywhere from 30 days to, I mean, we've helped people shop for a couple of years. So it just depends on like what's available in the market, what your budget is, and kind of your non-negotiables and like what you're comfortable finding. Kristen, any feedback on this page?
Yeah, I would just like to say that no matter how long your process is taking or what your timeline looks like, we are more than happy to hold your hand and go on that journey with you. If it's really, really fast and we want to close and have something done in 30 days, 60 days, we can do that. We can hustle and do that. If you are kind of more slow moving and you want to find the perfect place and we have to shop for a year, that's totally fine with us. The more time with you, the better.
Yeah, we have those conversations all the time where people are like, "Well, I'm thinking about moving in a year or like it's on the horizon for the next like 18 months." That's great. The more conversations that we can have, the longer we can work together, like the more confident I think you're gonna feel throughout the process. But also if it's like a we need to rip off the Band-Aid and move within 45 days, pedal to the metal. Let's do it.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, that's our presentation. Any questions, anything y'all feel like we didn't cover, anything we didn't mention, feel free to throw it in the chat. I'll also send out a full recording of the presentation with our contact information. So if you do have any questions after the fact, we always love to help support any way that we can.